Welcome to Conscious Pathways, the podcast where we explore the intersection of education and social justice through transformative conversations. I'm your host, Brittany, and today I am joined by Martha Castillo. Martha is an education disruptor and advocate for first-generation BIPOC students. Martha has over a decade of experience which spans roles as a public school educator, nonprofit board director, college instructor, and program manager. Despite overcoming a learning disability, she's earned 3 degrees and is a doctoral candidate at the University of Arizona. Martha has continued to champion solutions for underserved students as an equity-minded education leader. She collaborates to bridge the gaps in K-12 education, as well as higher education, emphasizing partnerships and community engagement. Martha is the founder of Seeds of Grit Educational Services, where she provides workshops on equitable education practices. She's committed to closing opportunity gaps and also volunteers with the Scholar Match as a virtual college coach. I am so excited to share this interview with you. We talked a lot about parent engagement and students with special needs. We talked about the very specific needs of underserved communities and students of color as they are navigating their first generation experience going to college. It's definitely a little bit of a different topic that we handle. Usually it's early education, but I think this is also a really great topic and I'm really excited to share this other perspective. So let's jump into that interview. Welcome to Conscious Pathways.
So much, Brittany, for this invite.
Thank
you. So excited to be here.
I am so excited to have you here. I was reading through your bio. I usually will find my guests like on LinkedIn. So either like I'll look for people or I'll see a post by someone. I'm like, ooh, you seem interesting. Let's connect. And so I saw something that you had posted and I was like, this is the person I would like to talk to.
Aw, thank you. Yeah, I saw your podcast too. Which is, like I mentioned, I love podcasts. So I'm like, how have I not heard of this podcast before? Like, I need to add it to my list for my walk. So excited to be here.
Yes.
And I am a LinkedIn fanatic, so super excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm so excited. One question I always ask my guests is, well, how did you get your start in education, or who or what inspired you to be an advocate for education?
Oh, that's a great question. So I was, it didn't come naturally. Let's just say that way. I initially started in corporate America. I worked for a private utility company in Southern California for 6 years. Great job, paid well. I actually started working on my undergrad at the University of Laverne in public administration because I initially thought, I'm going to work for a city or public environment, helping the public. During that time, I was volunteering with helping youth in the criminal justice system when they came out. Then I became a CASA advocate. If you're not familiar, court-appointed special advocate working with foster youth. Loved working with kids, underserved students. And I realized very quickly after 6 years in corporate America that it was not my vibe. Yeah. And I did not want to be there. It was great pay, but it was just not about the cubicle life. And I knew there was more for me. I struggled on my own with undiagnosed learning disability. I learned about it when I was in community college. So everything kind of just started lining up in terms of like, why am I not in education? I love working with youth. Why didn't I ever think of education? One day I just started looking on idealist.com and I came up with this opportunity to be a New York City teaching fellow. I love New York. I've been to New York several times and I said, you know what, this sounds great. Teaching in the Bronx and being a special education teacher while I get my master's, count me in. So I applied, I got it. And it was a big move. I moved from Southern California to New York, invested out my 401k, took a huge pay cut. So lots of sacrifices, but I have to say it's probably the most rewarding but most difficult job that I've ever done in my whole entire life is teaching.
Yes.
So hats off to all the teachers out there because it is not easy.
It is not easy. So rewarding. It is not easy, but I agree. So rewarding. And I've also lived that corporate life and been in the cubicles and the fluorescent lighting and the lack of windows.
Yes. Oh my God, that's totally the thing that sticks out, right? The fluorescent lights.
The
Oh my gosh.
fluorescent lights and
Yes.
the lack of windows. It's like, oh, why am I sad all the time?
Exactly. You wonder
You
why.
wonder why. But
Yeah, for sure.
yes, I love that our backgrounds kind of always take us in all these different directions, but for those of us who are in our heart and souls, like just know that education is where we want to be. It always finds a way.
Right.
We always find our way into
Exactly.
education
Somehow wiggles
somehow.
its way in.
Exactly,
Totally.
exactly. And I agree. It's so difficult, but it's also so incredibly rewarding and so incredibly necessary. And I know you said you had a background working with foster youth and working as a CASA, which is also a really important aspect too, because there's so many students out there that need positive, adult
Yeah,
interactions and positive, adult mentorship. And that's a really beautiful way to provide that to a, child who really could use that connection.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yes.
It opened my eyes to so many things, in terms of just like education and lack of resources and support for that specific population of students.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many, but I feel like during that time, it started to get even closer to this idea of like, well, what about their education and what
Yes.
does that look like? On top of everything else going on in their life. So very, very pivotal moment
Mm.
in my life for sure when I was a CASA.
Yes. Yes. And was there anything specific that inspired you to want to do CASA?
So during that time, I was working on my undergrad,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to work on a final paper thesis, and
Mm-hmm.
I did it on working with foster youth and what are the benefits of providing them with a mentor,
Mm-hmm.
specifically at a really young age. I really touched a lot on the education side of things. As you know, CASA oftentimes is the representative for the
Mm-hmm.
for the child when you go to court. Like if you see that needs are not being met in their foster home, you speak up as a CASA and you say,
Mm-hmm.
this is what they need and they are not getting it. So I think during that time, it was twofold. I had a passion for working for youth, and I thought, you know what, we need to bring more attention to this. So why not make it the topic of my paper, my final paper for, sorry, not my master's, my undergrad, it's my bachelor's degree.
Yes. Yes, that is such an important topic, especially with foster youth. And we've seen, I've worked for organizations in the past that worked with former foster youth and worked in advocacy and child welfare. And it's one of those things that once you kind of start opening the iceberg of it, you start seeing how deep this goes and how
Oh yeah,
historical it is, and just there's so much that goes to it than like what meets the eye. And so having,
exactly.
people who are advocating and having people who are researching it and actually engaging with that and also meaningfully engaging with people with lived experience is so important, so we can have the change that we really need to see, and that these young people, they deserve to see that change, right? They've been through enough already.
Absolutely. Yes,
Yes.
they
Yes.
really have.
So
So,
you've described yourself as like a first generation, I believe, college student. How has that shaped your general perspective within education?
oh, in so many ways. So, back when I was doing my undergrad, first gen wasn't really a thing, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
You had kind of heard of it, but not really understood what that meant. And little by little, I started identifying as just that. Like, wow, I really have had to figure stuff out on my own because
Yeah.
my parents didn't go to college. My parents are immigrants. They immigrated here from Mexico. So
Mm-hmm.
the concept of a degree, you know, they gave me an option essentially when I graduated from high school. Either you work or you go to school, and either one was fine with them. There
Mm-hmm.
wasn't this huge push, but I always knew I want to go to college. I want to get a degree,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to be educated. I loved education. But slowly but surely, through my own experiences, struggling with the learning disability that I did not know of
Mm-hmm.
until I was in community college, struggling with it and realizing, wow, if I'm going to this and I didn't know that I had a learning disability, how many other kids don't know this because they don't have the
Yes.
resources or the support or the parents to know what that might look like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there was that. And then on top of that, when I went into teaching and I started to see the community that I was serving students in the Bronx,
Mm-hmm.
they're underserved. A lot of their parents work multiple jobs. They don't have the time to provide them with the support oftentimes to guide them in those areas. They're just trying to put food on the table most of the
Mm-hmm.
time. So I started to realize that there was a lack of understanding, a lack of support in our education systems, and how truly disadvantaged oftentimes we feel as first gen students, not having the same support that perhaps other students that we go to college have. And you start to realize it when it's like, wait a minute, this person is more knowledgeable than I am. Like, what am I missing here? And it's
Yeah.
like, they had somebody that already, been there, done that, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of help walk them through that process. So it spurred this like passion for like, I want to be that person. I
Mm-hmm.
want to be the person to give them the resources and the guidance and say, hey, this is what you have to do, and make sure you do X, Y, and Z, and always ask for help. And I found myself going into that mode when I was teaching. So then
Wow.
I'm like, maybe I need to get into like college access because this is starting to be more of a passion in me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I graduated, that's when I realized, what's next. And I actually accepted a job back in Southern California with a nonprofit as a college readiness counselor for foster youth.
Wow.
Interestingly enough, since I had
Full
worked with
circle.
foster youth, and literally, so it's great. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a great learning opportunity, and it really again helped me continue to see the need
Mm-hmm.
within that population of students, to really support them and help them along the
Yes.
way.
Yes. And that's incredibly important. My parents also didn't go to college, and I had a grandma that had went to college, so I never really considered myself, first gen in any way, because I was like, oh, I
Right.
saw my grandma go, so like, it's fine. But it's so true, like, to have someone who has been there and can actually walk you through the process. There's so many additional opportunities and services that I just didn't even know that I had available
Right.
to me, because all I had seen was, work, 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 work. You put in the hard work and then you make it work. So I was over here
Exactly.
going to school full time and working full time and doing the absolute most, when there were scholarships I could have been applying to. There were other opportunities that I could
Right.
have been applying to. And so there's just things that I know now after finishing college. um,
After the fact.
After the fact, I'm like, I could have saved so much money.
Yes, that's the worst part, right? When
Yes,
you're like, all these scholarships were available and I had no idea.
exactly. Like, wait a minute.
So,
And so,
yes.
having someone who does know that, who actually does walk you through those. And also, I think part of, us being, part of like marginalized communities, is that asking for help sometimes is really extra difficult. And
It really is.
we feel like it's a sign of weakness. So I could have gone into the
Hmm.
consular's office and said, hey, I'm really struggling with this workload. I'm really struggling trying to get stuff done. Like, I'm staying up until, like, I'm pulling all nighters to finish all of my work because I have to go to work in the morning. And just, I could have gone to my counselor and just said that, but no, I was like, I'm strong. I can do this. Like, I don't need help. But
Right.
looking back, I'm like, girl, if you don't go ask for help, like,
Yes, that's and then you start looking into like mental health, right? Because you're
yes,
stressing out. You're like, I don't know how to do this. Who am I
mm-hmm.
going to ask? And culturally speaking, you're right. In the Latino community, it's the same too, where it's like, well, you'll figure it out, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like, no, there's people there to help me.
Yes,
Why am I not asking them for help? That's what they're there for.
yes,
Um, so
yes.
yeah, there's so many things that you don't know what you don't know, right?
Exactly.
Is
You
really
don't know
what it
what you
comes
don't
down to.
know. And I know there are a lot more colleges that are, looking at more accessible options to kind of understanding culturally, right? That there might be
Right.
people out there that need help, but culturally, that's just not something that is a part of their practice right now. And so I
Hmm.
know there are programs out there that are trying to make it more accessible, trying to encourage students to use these services and doing it in more culturally kind of relevant ways to which we will want to
Right.
engage in that, right? So just telling someone to go ask for
Absolutely.
help when that's not something that they are culturally used to doing, that they're just not going to utilize those services. And then, organizations are going to be
Absolutely.
saying, well, they must not need it because they're not using it. And it's like, well, we need to think outside the box a little bit. We need to look at the
Exactly.
culture that we're trying to appeal to here.
Yes. So many things go into that, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
just about building it and oh, they're going to come. It's like, how can we make it something that they can actually use and want to
Mm-hmm.
use and access
Yeah.
openly? And what are we doing as an organization
Mm-hmm.
to be more welcoming? Or what are we not doing, right?
Yes.
That is perhaps keeping us from being welcoming. Um, with that being said, like, I'm working on my dissertation right now, and one of the big topics is the the impact of family engagement on the persistence for
Mm.
first generation students. And that's one aspect that I think in the time that I've been in education, I've seen that there's so much work to be done there, especially
Yes.
with, our parents of color. How
Mm-hmm.
do you make your school more welcoming to them? How do you make them want
Mm.
to engage more with teachers, with their admin? It's such an important part of, engaging in your child's education. But if the
Mm.
school is not doing that, or even higher ed institutions, their first year is very important for them to know what it's about. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing that I feel is so, so important
Yes.
to help that population out.
Yes, yes, that family engagement. And I always say, like, when you're working in a classroom, you're building a community. So the students inside of your classroom are
Absolutely.
part of that community, but also the wider school is a part of that community, other teachers, the admin, the principal, right?
Right.
And then of course the families are a part of that community, and the community outside the actual school building are a part of that. All of these things are working together in tandem to create this
Yeah.
community. And we do a disservice to, the students and the wider community when we aren't meaningfully and authentically engaging the people who
Yep.
are right there with us, right? Um,
Absolutely.
and so, what kind of challenges have you seen with regards to involving, like, just parent engagement, really getting them to meaningfully engage? What kind of challenges have you seen in terms of just education, or in terms of just parents wanting to be engaged, or parents wanting to be involved? What
Mhm.
kind of challenges are out there?
Oh, that's a great question. Again, I'm in the midst of that research,
Yeah.
and one thing that honestly has come up so much in the research that I've been doing is it kind of goes hand in hand, this idea of family and community
Mm,
for first gen population. But one thing that has come up consistently is it's not that the parents don't want to engage,
mm,
it's how is the school engaging them, right?
yes,
You have a workshop, but if you have it in the middle of the day, you're not going to have a lot of parents. So, what are we
exactly.
doing to access that population? Are we providing free childcare? Are we providing free snacks?
Mm-hmm.
These are things that we don't really think about, right? But
Mm,
if a parent is working and say it's a single family home, or even if, mom's available but dad's at work, like who's going to take care of the kids? Little things
mm-hmm.
that you would think are common sense are not necessarily thought of,
Yes.
at the moment when you build these workshops. Another thing that I think has come up a lot is, and still believe it or not, it's that language barrier for our Latino community specifically, or
Mm,
even just any other community that does not speak English and does not have English as their first language. Like, are
mm,
you using other methods, whether it's translator, something to make it more accessible to different types of communities
mm,
is so, so important. And on top of that, if you're working with students that are first gen or will be first gen, do they know the value of education?
mm,
Speaking for myself, my parents knew that college was a good thing, but they didn't know why. They didn't know the difference
mhm,
between, oh, what's a bachelor's and what's a master's and what's a doctorate and what is this degree going to get you, right?
mhm,
So a simple lesson or even, parent teacher conference, hey, let's talk a little bit about the importance of college. Why is it important,
mhm,
right? Things that again you don't think about at the moment because you think, oh well, they know education is important. Do
mhm.
they? Like
Yes.
it's kind of common sense to one, but when you start to think, like you said, outside of the box, you
Mhm,
start to realize, oh wow, we really haven't thought about this specific community of parents.
mhm.
I think that's one thing that I making it accessible and thinking about
Yes.
our different types of parents and communities that we serve.
Yes. And I love so much about that because it's the making it accessible. It's so important, right? So sometimes we think
Yes.
when parents aren't engaging in the classroom, coming from that classroom experience, sometimes when we offer, like, oh, you can come into the classroom and read a book, or you can come into the classroom and do this, or, we make it very narrow in the ways that parents can engage within the classroom with their student.
Mhm.
And then when parents aren't jumping to do that, sometimes as educators, we think, oh, well, they must not care, or they don't want to,
Right.
or, like it's not important to them, right? Or we'll have
Mhm.
parents missing parent teacher conferences, and it's like, oh well, they don't care about their child. And like,
Right.
on, being in the teacher's position, right, it's, you put a lot of work into that, and you're looking at all these different things, you got all these students that you gotta like do assessments for, and there's just a lot, going on,
So much.
so much. But sometimes we do need to take that step and that pause and ask some different questions, which
Hmm.
is really important,
Exactly.
right? Is okay, so I have a parent who's not really showing up for parent teacher conferences. I have a parent who's not signing up for the potlucks, that's not coming in, you know, that could lead me to make some assumptions, but maybe that could
Hmm.
lead me to ask some different questions about why,
Exactly.
right? Because if the
Right.
only way that they can engage is during the day, well, they've probably got to go to work. If they have even younger
Hmm.
children, someone's got to watch that kid. And,
Right.
you haven't really made it accessible, even though we might in the moment think that we have. But
Right.
that's when we've got to start asking a little bit deeper questions and really trying to understand, the minds of parents, especially when you might have first gen parents who, like you said, might not, fully comprehend like the importance of higher education, or it's just not something that they have experience with or not something that they value. Or another thing is that parents could have just had a really negative experience with school themselves,
Exactly.
and so
Right.
that means that their view of school is like, well, if that happened to me, that's going to happen to them. That's the way that all schools are.
Hmm.
That's the way all teachers are. And so if they're coming in with their own kind of negative views of school, then that's just something that it's good for us to know, and it's good for us to engage
Absolutely.
with them in kind of different ways to help challenge that narrative.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think another factor that I at the moment when I was teaching, I really thought about it's like, do we have a diverse PTA or a diverse
Mm,
group of parents that are meeting on if we had a group of parents, what does that group of parents look like?
mm,
And that's another aspect that we really, I think, need to pay attention to.
mm.
Again, they might not have time to maybe meet at a specific time, but we need to make sure that our PTAs look like our students, right?
Yes.
Because that makes a big difference in terms of decisions that are being made for our students.
Mm-hmm.
Huge, huge, huge.
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
definitely another important factor.
Our PTAs, our school boards. It's important to like make
Yeah.
sure that even like our teachers in the community look like the community.
Yes,
That's important too,
literally.
is just being intentional about when we're crafting our teaching teams to make sure that we're also being intentional about who we're inviting into that space as well. Like we want to make sure that the students can see themselves represented in their, school
Absolutely.
teachers and administrators. And like you said, the PTA, it's, decisions are being made, and we want to make sure that our community has a seat at that table, and not only has a seat at that
Yes.
table, but their voice is heard and their voice is valued,
Yes.
because oftentimes we get to the table and that's about it.
And that's it. That's as far as it goes.
It's as far as it
You
goes.
raise your hand and I say, we'll take that into consideration. And
Yes.
then nothing happens.
And
It's like, wait a minute, what am I here for?
exactly. So we got to go a little step further,
Yeah.
like get at the table, but also,
Yes.
yes, make
A
sure that,
two-step process for sure.
yes, yes. So in regards of that parent and, school community engagement, how do you think that parents and teachers can work together to support, a student's, long-term goals, whether that is higher education, whether that's trade school, whether that's no school at all, like how can they work together to support that student?
I love that. I think one of the biggest takeaways that I've seen in just working with different, like as a teacher, as a counselor, as an educator, I think one of the biggest takeaways that I've had is making sure, to your point, asking the right questions as a teacher, and on the flip side, as a parent, not being afraid to
Mm,
either ask questions or push back.
yes.
Oftentimes, as a teacher, there were times where things were being told to the parents of my students where I'm like, whoa, whoa, let's ask some questions here.
Yes.
Especially when you're a special education teacher and you're working with
Mm-hmm.
IEPs, that's a huge,
Yes.
red flag when say the
Yes.
school's saying, hey, this is what we're thinking, and then the parent comes and say, hey, this is what they're thinking of doing. Let's ask some questions, right?
Yes.
Let's ask some questions. Let's take a step back. And you don't have
Mm-hmm.
to say yes to everything. Do not feel like you have to say yes to everything. And
Yes.
it's tough, right, as a teacher because obviously you work for the school, but you know that as a parent, if I was the
Mm-hmm.
parent of that child, I would have a lot of questions.
Yes.
So not being afraid to partner with your teacher as a parent to say, hey, what do you know about this? Do you have any? Oftentimes, I found myself giving parents resources. So as a
Mm-hmm.
teacher, being well informed about resources in the community, connecting them with organizations that perhaps work on topics of like specifically with IEPs. I would literally try to connect them with organizations that would advocate for students oftentimes if they were running into a lot of issues. Because the truth is, as a teacher, you're not supposed to know everything,
Yeah.
right? And oftentimes I didn't. And I had to be honest, like, you know what? I don't know the answer to this question, but I have a great resource.
Yes.
And here's the information. And let me connect you with so and so because I've already talked to them. So I think it goes both ways, working together in partnership and not being afraid. I think oftentimes, again, speaking from the Latino community, there's this fear that I would see in parents where it's like they were afraid to ask me a question. I'm like, I'm a teacher. Like
Yeah.
I'm just a person. You can ask me a question. Like there's nothing wrong with asking a question. There won't be repercussions, right? You can just have an honest conversation. So I think it goes both ways. I think that's how you build trust,
Yes.
right? Being transparent about, hey, this is what I could tell you, this is what I can. But wherever I can't, let me give you a resource that's going to help you out, right? Because I don't want to leave them hanging. That was my big thing. Like, if I can't help them, I want somebody else to help them because I know that there's people that are already doing the work. So, as parents, they're so busy. Like, they don't have time to look for, hey, go to this website. No. Here's the number. Here's the contact. Call them. Or, hey, let me email them for you and connect them to you so you can set up a meeting. Find ways to help make it easier for them because they have so much on their plate, especially depending on how many kids are in the household. Like, I can't even imagine having to facilitate that. So, being a partner, thinking of it as more of a partnership, supporting this one student that you want to, do big things in life. So that's the way I like to look at it.
You just dropped so many valuable gems right there. Because it is a partnership and it is you're building that relationship. And, I don't have children of my own, but I've worked with children with, special needs. And I can see how hard that is on parents, right? Parents don't generally go into parenting with the expectation that their student is going to have exceptional needs or have additional and special needs.
Right.
These things happen, and it doesn't mean that the child is bad or wrong or anything is wrong with the child. It just means that they have additional needs that we need to be aware of. And it can be so tricky to find care, and it can be so tricky to navigate the space because there's all this like insurance that you have to go through. And then I worked in early childhood, so we kind of are in the beginning parts of that. So it's like I'm seeing some things and I'm like, you know what, this is kind of outside of the realm of what I would expect from a child of this age. So maybe we can start talking about screenings. And it gets difficult because there's usually sometimes some resistance there. Sometimes parents can see it and they're like, yeah, I've been wondering about that. But sometimes they might not see it, and it's hard to come to terms with that. But it's important to be really engaged in that process with that student because we know that early intervention is so important and sets that child up for success throughout their educational journey and throughout their life, right? And can really be helpful to students. And parents should be have the skills to advocate for their child and be able to ask, like you said, ask a lot of those questions and build partnerships with your child's teacher, because you both are going to see two sides of the same child, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So that's so true. And that's the thing is that oftentimes, as a teacher, you oftentimes see their children more than they do. So helping them see that, hey, this is what I noticed in the classroom. How's he or she at home? And then having conversations around that. And again, it doesn't have to be a meeting. It could just be a quick email or, hey, text. This is what I saw. Is everything okay? What are you seeing at home? Just a quick communication. I think it's also important.
Yes. And as you said, it's about building that partnership too. So when you engage meaningfully and authentically with parents, right, they're going to want to be more open with you, right? So you go in with that, vulnerability, and we're both in this for the best interest of your child, right? Because there can be a lot of resistance, like you said. Sometimes the school is saying we're going to do this, and there's all these meetings, and there's all these big words and all these big terms, and you have to go to insurance and doctor's appointments. So sometimes there's just so much going around that to know that as a parent that they have a partner in this that is like, no, we're both here for the child. We both want what's best for them and we're
Mm-hmm.
going to advocate together. Just knowing that you
Yes.
have a team can be so pivotal to making sure that that student has, what they need to be successful. I find
Yeah.
it's so disheartening. I have so many friends who have, just recently discovered that they had ADHD their entire life, right? And were
Yes. That
never
happens so
diagnosed.
often.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like, man, you could have had so many resources. You could have had so, like, this could have been so much easier for you in school if we had known,
Exactly. I will say this on the flip side, because for me, I had dyscalculia and I didn't know, which is like dyslexia, but in math is the way I like to describe it.
Huh.
Literally about to drop out of college, Brittany.
Oh.
And I went to this like I literally was on probation. And when I tell you, when they gave me that and said, this is what you have and this is where you're not passing your math classes,
Mm-hmm.
it was like my mind just opened. I felt like, okay, great. I knew something was wrong.
Yes.
That sense of relief, like I don't know how to describe it other than it was a sense of I knew it. Like I knew it.
Yes.
I'm not broken. This is we can work
Exactly.
with this.
Exactly. Like sometimes
So
I think that, parents or caregivers might think that they're protecting the child by not, exposing them to being stigmatized, which is very valid. It happens, right? There's a
right.
lot of stigmas for, mental and emotional and all these different disabilities are stigmatized there. But also the fact of one just knowing that, okay, it's not that I am broken or I'm somehow wrong. It is just, oh, okay, my brain just needs some help in this area.
Yeah, it works in a different
It
way.
just
We all
works.
have different brains.
Yeah, we all have different brains. Brain's just working in the way that it wants to work, and so we can make life
Right.
easier.
Exactly. We just find the tools and we make it work somehow, and we just get the support. But yeah, it's
Yes.
it was one of those things. I think I nothing happens by coincidence.
Mm,
I fell into special education for a reason. Like I had been through it
yes.
myself, and it's like, if anybody knows how this is, kid, let me tell you. Let me help you. Let me see what I can do to help you because
Yes.
it's not a cool feeling, to
Yes.
be going through that on your own
It isn't.
for sure.
It isn't. And we definitely need more advocates out there who, understand and are there for the students and the children because, it's we don't want people to have to go through this.
Absolutely not. Yeah, if you can
Yes.
avoid it, that's the best medicine for sure.
Yes. Yes. So in your experience with advocacy work, have you encountered any like successful strategies or programs that are really addressing the needs of like first generation, especially first generation and, Black and Indigenous, people of color? What kind of strategies and programs are out there that have been really effective?
The biggest one, I think, I am a big advocate of college access organizations of
Mm,
every kind. I'm actually a former board member at Scholar Match, which basically works with first generation uh, students
mm,
that have a need financially and really in terms of just knowing how to guide them through college. And
mm,
if you have a student that needs guidance, highly encourage you to look into Scholar Match. They actually provide free virtual college coaches
mm.
to help students with the college application process, which again is one of those things that if you're first gen, you don't know how to do it. It's not something that comes
Yeah.
naturally. Like there's so much. Like
Mm-hmm.
not until I became a college counselor, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a lot. Like I had to
Mm-hmm.
do it, but when I went to undergrad, I was already like an adult, so it was a little bit easier for me to comprehend. But when you're
Yeah.
a teenager and you're filling out like not one but multiple college applications,
Mm-hmm.
on top of that financial aid and trying to understand all those requirements, it's a lot. It is a lot to understand. And organizations like Scholar Match, there's a few others, so many others out there that I think are doing amazing work in helping that specific population of students
Mm.
to really just help them understand what the college process looks like and not only getting them there, because that's the other thing that I found is that not all organizations work to get the student to college,
Mm.
but then it's like, oh, you made it, great. And it's like, no, that's not where it ends. Like you have to connect them with the support, a community
Yes.
there to keep them going because the first year's, I mean, you probably know what the first year, it's tough.
It's
It's like
tough.
the hardest year of college because you're like, where
Yeah.
am I? And what's going on? And, there's just so much that goes into it. And I think organizations that not only help get them to college, but have like continued support is
Mm.
probably one of the best things that you can do for this population of students, and connecting them to communities that they can stay in touch with and just
Yes.
connect and that look like them, and they feel like, okay, that imposter syndrome inevitably
Mm-hmm.
comes up, right, as a first gen student. And
Yep.
when you have a community in school or out of school that you can go to with questions, and hey, this is how I'm feeling, how do I navigate this, is so important. Like,
So important.
so important. So shout out to all the college access organizations
Yes.
out there, because y'all are doing amazing work. So I really think that that's what's kind of helping
Mm-hmm.
the first gen BIPOC community to kind of just keep pushing forward, because it's not easy. It really
It's
isn't.
not. It's not. And I love that you mentioned that connecting them to community part is that you're right. Like we can help them with the applications, and then once they're there, you're like, okay, go out, have fun, you know. And
And they're like, what?
so like, whoa,
That's scary.
I've got questions, especially for a lot of young people who are going to college right when they're 17, 18 years old. A lot has
Yeah,
just shifted all of a sudden.
literally.
Like you have a little bit more autonomy than you had before, and that's exciting. And you're in a different,
Yes.
you might be in a different community. Maybe your friends are there, maybe your friends aren't there. And so there's a lot going on, especially for that adolescent brain that is still developing and still growing. And so being
Yes.
able to connect them with community to say, yeah, we recognize that this is going to be probably a little tricky. Some people are going to jump into college and just coast on by and be good to go.
Exactly.
And but a majority of people get into college and it's hard and they struggle. And so knowing
It
that you
is.
have that community of people who are there to say like, yeah, you're supposed to be here. You've got support. You've got help.
Let
You
me help
matter
you.
here. Let me help you. Like, what do you need? You need study groups. You need resources. You need like what? Let's get you
Right.
there, right? And
Exactly.
that can do so much for students who are
It really does.
going to school, even kids who are still in high school, middle school, elementary, right? Having community and having trusted adults that you can connect with and you can go to and who understand you, that can
Yes.
take you from 0 to 60.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yes.
and there's so much research on it. One of the books that I actually read not too long ago, I've
Mm.
actually read this book like several times. If
Ooh.
anybody's interested, it's the book David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell. Heavy research, but one of the biggest concepts that I took away, well, if you are a special education teacher, highly recommend.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this book is great because it talks about, believe it or not, there's something called desirable difficulties when you
Ooh.
have a disability, because there was an area of your life that was so difficult, you make up for it in other ways. So
Mm.
a lot of the most successful people out there have a learning disability.
Mm.
That's one of the pieces of information that he has. But another thing he touched on that I thought was so important, especially when I was working with foster youth and first gen students,
Mm-hmm.
is this idea of a small fish in a big pond,
Mm.
right? A lot of these students that are great and did amazing work in their high schools, top of their class, get to the UCLAs, the Harvards, the Princetons, and then they're there,
Mm-hmm.
and then they realize, oh my God, this is harder than I thought. And there's people that are a lot smarter than I am, and how am I going to manage this, right?
Mm.
So highly recommend, if you're in college access too, like, that's a great book to read, because it really helps you understand how, basically what he's saying in this book is that oftentimes a smaller school is better for high achieving students,
Mm.
probably, because it leads to a lot of other things, mental health issues, where you, like, I can't do this, or just flat out quitting and saying, I don't want to do this anymore,
Yep.
right? Because they just don't feel like they belong.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and obviously there's bigger conversations around that too. Like, we need to do more at the Princetons and the Harvards of the world, and provide
Mm-hmm.
more community for them to feel like they identify and belong in that community as well. So, so many topics, Brittany, around accessibility and
Yes.
inclusion, and just so
Mm-hmm.
much work to be done, I think, in education. But it's exciting, right?
It
That's
is.
what we're here for. That's what we're here
Exactly.
for.
Exactly. There's so many exciting ideas. It can be disheartening at first when we're looking at all the problems in
Mm,
education and we're looking at all of the students who fall through the cracks, and we look at all the students who have been failed by our education system and other systems, child welfare, and just everything around that. You see the failures a lot, and it's really disheartening. It can feel like there's no, like, you just feel like there's no way out in a way. But then
right.
you see people who are doing the work, and you see, you read the books and you start reading the more the theory, the philosophy, the research, and it feels, I know, it gives me a lot of hope. It's like, okay, like
Yes.
we're out here doing the thing, because it's, I always say
Hmm.
this, but they deserve it. Students deserve it, teachers deserve it,
Absolutely.
families deserve it. They deserve to have an education system that is working in their favor. And speaking of an
Hmm.
education system that's working in their favor, how do you reimagine the education system?
Oof. I think one of the biggest takeaways in the past 10 years that I've been in education, and so many, I've been through, public education as a teacher. I worked in
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit, worked in charter, virtual.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't I don't want to say we can't fix the system. It's really coming to the realization that this system was not made for people like me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think for me that was the biggest aha moment, is realizing, okay, so I have a system that was
Mm-hmm.
not created or tailored for me.
Yes.
So as an outside person, I want to be the person that's either bringing the solutions to these huge organizations that are accepting our students,
Mm-hmm.
so that we could start to make changes that are really going to welcome all students, right?
Yes.
Um, so I think trying to just make it inclusive for every single
Mm-hmm.
student, right? Not making it this box where you have to fit into this box, right? Let's
Yes.
make it more inclusive. Let's make it more welcoming. And let's start to change language around, who belongs and who doesn't. Because even though it's not said directly, you can
Mm-hmm.
kind of tell,
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
there, just by class sizes and,
Mm-hmm.
just experiences that I've heard some of my students say, where it's like, I'm the only person of color in this
Mm-hmm.
huge, auditorium in big university, and that to me
Mm-hmm.
is, it's sad. So
Yeah.
what are we doing to fix that? Because clearly to me that's a problem.
I agree.
So.
I agree. That is such a problem. And for me, I didn't realize how important it was to have, just looking around your classroom and see people that look like you, just to look around and
Yeah.
like, okay, I see brown people here. I see, brown people in in the leadership or as my teachers. I didn't realize how important that was. I grew up in, very predominantly white spaces throughout my,
Hmm.
I went to a lot of high schools, but most of them were predominantly white spaces. And I went to community
Right.
college, which where I was, it was kind of diverse with the community college I went to, and then
Hmm.
I transferred to my college that I went to, and it is like it's designated by the Department of Education as a primarily Hispanic serving institution, and
Oh,
so
gotcha.
when I would go to class, there's just brown people everywhere. So I'm just looking around, and it's just like the conversations they were so relatable. People would say something like,
Right.
"Oh yeah, like I experienced that, or I grew up like that." People who also had grew up with single moms, or people who also grew up in multi-generation homes and all these different things. Like the conversations I felt were more relatable to me because there's people like me.
Right.
They were all around, and that
Yeah.
deepened so much of my experience was just being around other people who looked like me, had my experiences, my teachers, like the way that they discussed things and the conversations they brought to the table and the nuance that they brought to the table because of
Absolutely.
their background and experience and what they've experienced and what they've seen and the research they've done. It's so incredibly important. And I didn't
It
realize it.
is just being seen, right? It's like, hey,
Yes.
I'm here, and you acknowledge that I'm here
Mm-hmm.
by making the space more accessible to all of us and having these
Mm-hmm.
conversations. Which, the thing that gets me is that oftentimes people talk about, like, oh, it's so uncomfortable talking about something. But we have to talk about it. Like, if we don't
Yes.
talk about it, how are we going to solve any of these problems?
Yes, yes. Most things we do
So
that are new and novel to us are a little uncomfortable at first.
yes, but
Like
that's how change happens,
that's how change
right? We got to talk
happens.
about it.
It's a little
Exactly.
awkward, and it's like watching a baby learn how to walk. It's awkward and it's
Yeah.
kind of silly and it's hard for them. They got a lot of muscles they got to
Right.
work to get there, but you give them like a month or so and they are confidently walking around, maybe even running. Like
Yes,
it
exactly.
it takes time, but the benefits we get by engaging in these conversations and the benefits we get when we are fully inclusive in our spaces, and it's not just you're allowed to be here, it's no, we want you to be here, we want you to feel welcome here, and we want you to be a part of this community. that feels different than, yeah, I guess you can sit here. Like,
Yes, exactly. I love that. That
yeah,
is so, so true.
it's a
Love it.
different vibe, you know?
It is. Absolutely. I like that.
Yes.
I love that
Well,
description.
Martha, I am so excited that you joined me. Where can my audience find you? Anything that you're working on that you're wanting to share?
Yes, LinkedIn, where
Okay.
you found me. So that's like my favorite platform. I
Hmm.
think that's the only social media I'm constantly on and,
Mm,
post as often as I can and have time because as I shared, I'm working on my dissertation, so that's
hmm.
taking up a lot of my time right now.
Yes.
But I am working on my baby right now. Hopefully more to come on that via LinkedIn, so definitely follow me on LinkedIn. But I
Hmm.
am working on, I'm calling it Ganas Ed. So if you know what ganas
Ooh.
means in Spanish, it's to have that desire, that push, like I really
Mm,
want this. And it's basically a community for all first gen BIPOC students to get all of the resources, get all of the guidance, get all of
mm,
the support that they need to keep going because I realized in the time that I've been with education that
mm.
that's what I needed. The whole time I was in college,
Yes.
that's what I needed. I needed a community. I
Hmm.
needed a group of people that I could identify with and cheer me on and cheer each other on. And
Hmm.
that's what I'm working on right now. As soon as I wrap
Ooh.
up this dissertation that's taken and consumed my life for
Yes.
the past 3 years, so yeah, I like to think I'm giving birth to two babies, the dissertation and Ghana's
Yes.
Ed. So definitely more to come. Well, please connect with me on LinkedIn, everyone, and
Yes.
more to come on that platform for sure. Thank you
Awesome.
for having me, Brittany. I really appreciate it.
Yes.
Great conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd love to have your perspective on here. I'm looking forward to all the all the work babies that are coming out.
Yes.
I'm very excited. I'll keep following you along and following on your journey. And I just was super impressed and just excited to see the more that you create. It's really great to see that journey and see you advocating for
Awesome.
a community that definitely needs that advocacy and needs, people's eyes to be on it. So thank you so much for all that you do, and thank you so
Awesome.
much for joining me.
Thank you. Have a good one. Thank you for all
thank
you're doing. Keep
thank,
doing it,
thank
please. We need
you.
more of this.
Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning into Conscious Pathways. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to Conscious Pathways wherever you get your podcasts. And feel free to leave a rating, review, or just share it with your friends. It really does help the podcast to grow. If you are a person who is into video podcasts, you can check out the Conscious Pathways YouTube channel, and you'll have the video version of this podcast and all the other podcasts as well. And until next time, wherever you are on your conscious journey, don't forget to leave courage and kindness. And I'll see you next time. Bye.